This is something I always wanted to touch on. The West Coast and the East Coast, okay? And the West Coast owing the East Coast reparations when it comes to hip hop. Now, Nori said something. He was like, they should have a hip hop union, I believe. So for example, just think about like a hip hop pension, you know? So for the older guys, you know, who are probably older now, they got bad deals, you know what I'm saying? So right now they're not making us much money, but they were actually the foundation of hip hop, but they was kind of like the sacrifice, you know what I'm saying, for other artists that came after them to learn the game. So now that those artists is making money, it's almost like give back or everybody put money together. So it's like, yo, this guy was a rapper in the 80s, but now he needs this. So you can more so even apply and say, hey, I'm a hip hop OG. Here's my application. I need this amount of money for medical fees, or I need this amount of money for this, blah, 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 whatever it is, you know what I'm saying? So kind of like, you know, not leaving the older behind, because they put in the work for the newer generation to be able to be living as good as they living right now. Because, you know, hip hop is an art form that people didn't really predict how powerful it was going to be globally. You know what I'm saying? Now, in that sense, right, if hip hop was to transition to become more of like a nation in a way, right? The West Coast would owe the East Coast reparations because of the bodies that the West Coast dropped. The West Coast has dropped some prominent figures from the East Coast. Tupac, Biggie, Pop Smoke. I know people are not going to say P&B Rock is a prominent rapper, and I say prominent as in like, you know, had multiple hits and people were looking at him like this guy's the next up, you know what I'm saying? But still, P&B Rock was somebody from the East Coast that was feeding his family through hip hop, you know? And I think, you know, the West Coast have had disregard for talent. You know, the way I look at it is like some people, they're so valuable that, you know, it's like, really? You just going to drop them? You know, you just going to drop them for some chains? Drop them for a robbery? Drop them for what they said? You know what I'm saying? And the West Coast, you know, if you look at the East Coast has emulated the West Coast gangbanging culture. Hip hop started in the East Coast. That was the foundation. And then, you know, the West Coast, you know, took over in its own way and even took it to this whole gang culture aspect of hip hop and storytelling, where the East Coast now started being Bloods and Crips. You know what I mean? That was not an East Coast thing. So the West Coast has had tremendous influence on hip hop, right? But at the same time, they have taken away some very powerful figures. Like, imagine if Biggie was still alive. Imagine if Tupac was still alive. Imagine if Pop Smoke was still alive. We don't even know where Pop was about to take this whole thing. You know what I'm saying? When East Coast was, when the South, you know, was running things, and then here comes Pop Smoke, where the East Coast now has this faith. It's like, ooh, it's coming back to East Coast. You know what I'm saying? And Pop got us doing all these dances and whatnot. There's this new vibe, this new energy, and the West Coast just took it away, just like how they did Biggie. So, yes, in a perfect world, the West Coast, as a hip-hop nation, would owe reparations to the East Coast as a hip-hop nation. I want to hear y'all's thoughts. Subscribe to my channel, Cancel Beto. Let's bang.